Okay, gentlemen, good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. We're continuing with Pirqe Abot. We're doing Perek Sheni, Halacha Aleph. And I'm going to tell you that we're up to Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh had actually three names. His name was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. His name was Rabbi, and his name was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He was called Rabbi Yehuda Nasi because he was the political leader of the Jewish people. And not only was he the political leader of the Jewish people, but he was very successful at that. This is after the destruction of the Beit Sheni, and after the Bar Kokhba revolution. That was a generation later, and then comes Rabbeinu HaKadosh. During his days, the Jewish people actually had, Rabbeinu HaKadosh had personal relationships with the Roman governor. And because of that, it was an unusual time of peace and prosperity for the Jewish people. So he was called Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He was called Rabbeinu HaKadosh because he was considered one of the most holiest people of the Tanaim that we ever had. And Harambam actually says that, and Harambam is quoting the Gemara, that he says that from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest, most knowledgeable leader that we ever had. But what was unique about Moshe Rabbeinu was that he had tremendous wealth and power. So they say from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, never did you have this combination of incredible intellect, knowledge, wisdom, together with wealth, together with political power. So that combination, where the Gadol Hadol B'Torah is also the greatest, most powerful person in the Jewish community, was an incredible combination. It rarely happened. It happened in the days of Moshe, and it happened in the days of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So he was called Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and he was also called Rabbi because he was considered the teacher of all of Am Yisrael. So it really was a unique time in Jewish history. And because it was a
Abraham
unique
Avinu
time,
also fit into that category?
I'm sorry?
Abraham Avinu, wasn't he also
All
super
right.
powerful and wealthy?
Yeah, he was, but it wasn't, that was before the Torah was given. So, but yeah, he certainly was, and he was one individual, right? He was the only Jew, and so in a sense, it's a little different. But in the case of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, because it was a time of great prosperity for the Jewish people, um, it was also the generation during which the Mishnah was finally edited. The Mishnah was finalized, it received its final form. Um, and this was only possible because we had a leader like Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who had such excellent relationships with the Romans. And because of that, as I said, it was a time of peace and prosperity for the Jewish people in Israel. So when you have peace and prosperity, when you have that combination, then you can have a time of Torah, a higher time of Torah. Not to say that in times of poverty there's no Torah, but when you have this combination, there is the ultimate manifestation of learning. So that was in the Mishnayot. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh was also the composer of the Mishnayot. Together with the Hachamim, together with his Betim, the Mishnah took its final form. So that's Rabbi. So we're dealing here with a very special, Tanna. The Hachamim also tell us that the previous great Hacham was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was also one of the greatest Tanaim ever. He's actually the one who started the project of editing the Mishnayot. My father discusses this in his Golden Doves, and I discussed it in my class that I gave to the Sephardic Habura in London. I gave a class, Introduction to Talmud, and in that class, I explained that Rabbi Akiva was the one who started the project of the Mishnayot. And the Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Ayin Bet, says that when Rabbi Akiva died, on the very day that Rabbi Akiva died, On that day, Rabbeinu Hakadosh was born. Shneimar v'zara hashemesh uba hashemesh. So always, as the sun is setting, uba hashemesh, just as the sun is setting, v'zara hashemesh. There's another. The sun is rising, right? V'zara hashemesh uba hashemesh. So when the son of Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Akiva left this earth, and in a sense there was a feeling of darkness, but at that very moment already the sun was rising. V'zara hashemesh uba hashemesh. So that was Rabbeinu Hakadosh. Rabbeinu Hakadosh was considered, and was not just was considered, was one of the greatest Jewish leaders, perhaps the greatest after Moshe Rabbeinu. And they said that he had incredible wealth, absolutely phenomenal wealth of, as I said, phenomenal power. So let's read what he says because it's actually quite interesting. Rabbi Omer, Ezohi derech yeshara sheyavor lo ha'adam. What is the straightest path, meaning the best path that a person can sheyavor lo? Sheyavor lo is milashon. One of the melachot on Shabbat is borer. Borer means to choose something. There's different possibilities. For example, you have um, you have a mixture of wheat and maybe there's some stones in the wheat. So you're going to separate the wheat from the stones, right? That's called borer. So you're choosing. So in life, there's different choices that a person can make. We all can make choices, right? And when you choose, we're not just talking about, what time did I set the alarm for today, but rather, what is my plan in life? How do I plan? Where do I want to go with the life that I was given? That's a choice that you have to make. And the Rabbeinu Kadosh wants to give us guidance. He wants to help us make the right choice, right? Because there are so many choices. So he asks the question, what is the correct a path that a person should choose for himself? And he says, he gives a principle. The answer to the question is, he's not going to tell you, go to Tibet, go to the Himalayas. I don't know, um, go to Sedona, Arizona, or become an athlete, no. Rather, he's going to give us a principle. And the principle that Rabbeinu Hakadosh gives us is a principle that will enable us to choose within our own particular context what we should choose, because everybody has a different context. So the answer is never universal. That's why he doesn't give a specific answer, because a specific answer would be irrelevant. A correct answer is one that takes account of the fact that different people are dealing with different situations and have different potentialities. So he says the following principle. Here it is. Kol shehi tiferet le'oseha v'tiferet lo min ha'adam. Try to find the following balance. On the one hand, it should be something that brings you personally, right? A sense of glory, a sense of meaning in your life. You want to feel good about yourself and good about what you're doing. So first of all, whatever you do should bring you that sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. So at the end of the long life, you should look back and say, this was a glorious choice that I made in my life, right? So that's tiferet le'osea. It brings glory to he who does that, who makes that choice. But that's not enough. Because, in Western society, we're always taught to worship something. We're not taught to worship God anymore because that's something that's too foreign. But rather, we're taught to worship ourselves. All these self-help videos, all these eating right videos, all these exercise videos, everything is about ourselves as individuals. But Rabbeinu HaKadosh says that if it's only going to be about what's good for you, then you failed. And why is that? Because if it's only about what's good for you and it's only about what brings you glory, then when your life ends, and everybody's life eventually ends, right? We all leave this world, there's nothing there. That's it. The glory is gone. So therefore he says, V'tiferet lo min ha'adam. It should be something that also brings glory upon humanity, upon civilization. So don't just look upon yourself, but consider the outside world. What contribution are you making? I'll give you a very simple, just a simple example to illustrate this, but of course it's much more than this. So a person wants to give tzedakah. So one choice he says, well, you know, I want to give all my money to tzedakah and I want to live as a pauper and I want to live in poverty, but I'll give everything I have to tzedakah. So that's tiferet lo min ha'adam. He is having a positive influence upon the world around him. But it's not tiferet le'osea because he's putting himself into a situation of poverty. So that's not the right choice. That would not be a good thing to do. On the other hand, if a person says, "Okay, I want to accumulate all the wealth, and it's mine, and I'll save it, and it'll all be there in my bank account," well, you're bringing good upon yourself, but now you're leaving nothing to humanity. So in this example, what you should do is you should, on the one hand, give some of the money to tzedakah because you will be benefiting humanity, 10%, maybe up to 20%, right? But don't give so much so that you yourself will now be in a situation where you're hurting yourself, right? So you always have to find that right balance. You have to do something that's beneficial to yourself, which at the same time is beneficial and glorious to the people around us. I will give you an example, and I know that some of the things I say, perhaps I am in the minority, meaning I say some things in my classes, and I know that there's disagreement about some of the things I say, and I respect all opinions. You know that. You know that I love all opinions, and I'm always respectful of people. But I still will express my opinion. So I'll give you an example. There is this thing in Israeli society where, for example, if you're born in a certain neighborhood or a certain city to a particular sect, Haredi, Hasidi, where what you want to do is you want to be studying Torah all day and doing nothing else but studying Torah. So, for example, and let's assume that they're actually studying. Let's assume, let's in our minds, let's not look at the reality of the situation, which is many people can't study all day. The fact is, very few people have the intellectual skills and capacity to study all day. So, and few of them actually study all day. Few of them are successful in their studies, but put that on the side. Let's say that they actually were studying all day. So they're bringing great benefit to themselves. But is it tiferet to society? Does it bring glory to society? Meaning in the sense that when people look at that, do they say this is beautiful? Well, if the answer is there's bitterness and they say, well, why don't you serve the army? My children are in the army. My children are risking their lives. Why don't you do the same thing? Why is it that it's only about you and it's not about helping the society around us, right? There is that element. So the Torah says, or rather, Rabbeinu HaKadosh says, you can't just think about the way you perceive things. You may believe that sitting in a room and studying, and again, assuming it's studying Torah, I'm making an assumption here. I realize it's an assumption, and it's not a true assumption in most cases, but nevertheless, let's make that assumption. You're sitting in a room studying Torah all day, and you think that's a great thing, and you're doing a great thing, you're bringing benefit to yourself. But Rabbeinu HaKadosh says that the world doesn't end at the tip of your nose. And if you think the world ends at the tip of your nose, you're not choosing the right path, because the right path has to take account of the world outside of yourself, right? So this is the correct approach. Think about what you can do that is glorious, and glory always involves Torah and mitzvot, but it should also be something that's beautiful to the world. Tiferet, what does the word tiferet means? Beautiful, right? So if what you're doing doesn't appear beautiful, right? Then that's a problem, right? And this is an issue. This is an issue that we have to be aware of. So this is what the Ben Kadosh says: Kol shehi tiferet le'oseha, v'tiferet lo min ha'adam. That's the first advice of Rabbeinu Hakadosh. Great advice. Lesson number 1.
I think I need a tissue for my nose, Rabbi.
I'm sorry?
I think I need a tissue for the tip of my nose.
Okay. Good. The second thing is, והווה זהיר במצווה קלה כמצווה חמורה. The next thing Rabbeinu HaKadosh says is as follows. There are many mitzvot in the Torah. Some of them, and I'm going to explain what this means. He's talking about mitzvot aseh, right? There's Tariag mitzvot. There's a total of 613 mitzvot, right? There's shasa mitzvot lo ta'aseh, ve'ramah mitzvot ta'aseh. So there's 248 positive commandments, instructions. You must do this. You should do this, right? So those are mitzvot aseh. And then there's 365 mitzvot lo ta'aseh. Do not do this. You may not do that. Here it's talking about mitzvot aseh. Ve'haveh zahir b'mitzvah kala kemitzvah chamura. Be very careful when you perform the mitzvot. You should be as careful when you perform a mitzvah that appears insignificant to you as a mitzvah that appears very significant to you. Allow me to explain that. When it comes to mitzvot lo ta'aseh, the Torah always tells us what the punishment is for violation of a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. The Torah is clear. Some mitzvot lo ta'aseh, the punishment is malkut. Other mitzvot lo ta'aseh, the punishment could be mitat bidei shamayim. Other ones, the punishment could be karet. So we always know, or it could be mitat betin. So we always know which mitzvah lo ta'aseh is the most severe, and which is less severe, and which is the least severe. But all of them are severe, by the way. It's not that there are any, easy ones, But the point is, we have this hierarchy, and the hierarchy is clear. It's set forth in the Torah. But that's only with mitzvot lo ta'aseh. With respect to mitzvot aseh, there is no hierarchy. We don't know what the reward is, right? Because the Torah rarely tells us what the reward is for any given mitzvah. There's a few cases where it says so, but that's very rare. So now a person sees a mitzvah and he says, this is a very insignificant mitzvah. The Perasha says that, in terms of this Perasha, I'm talking Perashat Kedoshim, that we're going to be reading on Shabbat. It contains many mitzvot aseh. It contains many mitzvot lo ta'aseh. It contains many mitzvot aseh. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So you say, okay, that's not such an important mitzvah. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. For example, tefillin. Tefillin is an important mitzvah aseh, right? I can understand it. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is nice. It's just a nice idea. It's not something nice to study, to study about, to read about. It makes us feel good, but it's not a real mitzvah. So he says, if you feel that a particular mitzvah is a light mitzvah, and therefore you shouldn't be careful with that mitzvah because you feel it's not so important, that's a big mistake, right? And the reason for that is she'en ata yodea matan secharav shel mitzvah. You don't know what the reward is for any given mitzvah. We just don't know. And I'll give you the classic example. One of the most difficult mitzvot aseh, is kibud avayim, right? This is a lifelong endeavor to show proper respect to one's parents. Is difficult, right? Because it's with us for so many years, and it takes a lot of effort, and sometimes there's psychological issues, right? There's always that as well. So you say that's a really hard mitzvah aseh, and the Torah says that if you do kibud avayim, the reward will be arichut yamim. Leman yarichun yamecha leman yitav lach. Okay, fine. Okay. Now, on the other hand, you have a very light mitzvah. One of the easiest mitzvot to do is mitzvah shiluach haken. A person sees a mommy bird, like a dove, and the dove is on top of its babies or the eggs, and you want to take the eggs. Before you take the eggs, you have to hold the dove by its wings, basically, and fly it away, kiss it away, and then you take the eggs. That whole mitzvah takes what, a second, maybe 2 seconds, right? So this is a mitzvah kala. And yet the Torah says that if a person does this, leman yarichun yamecha ulmani tavlach, it uses the same language as it uses with respect to kibud ava'im. So you don't know what the reward is for a mitzvah. Be joyful when you see somebody. Let them know that you're happy to see them. That's not a mitzvah. Is that really a mitzvah? Well, you don't know. It's a light mitzvah, certainly. It's a very easy mitzvah to do. So should I take it seriously? You don't know what you're doing with that mitzvah. You don't know what benefit you're bringing with that mitzvah. And you don't know how Hashem is going to reward for that mitzvah. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying, don't try to be selective and decide you're going to choose to do this mitzvah and not that mitzvah, because you could be totally messing it up. We don't understand what the reward is for the different mitzvah. And Rabbi David HaNagid, who was the grandson of Harambam, he brings a beautiful mashal explaining. So why is it? Why is it that God did not tell us what the reward is for most of the mitzvot? Why not? And he gives him a very nice mashal. This king, he has a beautiful orchard. He wants to plant an orchard, and he wants to have the orchard should be filled with different types of trees. And then he also has a vegetable area where he's going to have vegetables. And then he's going to have a flower garden where he's going to have flowers. And he invites his subjects, and he says, I have a project. I want to have this beautiful orchard and a vegetable patch and a flower garden. And I'd like everybody to choose something they want to plant and, to get to work. So some people decide to plant almond trees. Almond trees have beautiful flowers, especially in the springtime. Others decide to plant cherry trees. Others decide to plant apple trees. And then there are those who decide to work on the vegetable patch, and there are those who decide to work on the flowers. And after several years of working, the king has a beautiful orchard. The trees are now visible. They're beautiful vegetable patch and lovely flowers, and everybody's very happy. And the king gathers his people around and he says, I want to give you reward for having worked with me and helped me in putting together this beautiful garden that we can all now enjoy. Everybody can enjoy it. So some people, he gives them a nice amount of money for the work they did. Those people who planted the cherry trees, they got a nice check for $100,000. And then there's people who made the vegetable patch. Some of them get a check for $50,000, depending on what they planted. And everybody gets reward. Some people get more, some people get less, some people get much less. There are those people who the reward for what they did is pretty minuscule. It's pretty small and insignificant. And there's a lot of people at the end of the day, they're very happy. Look at the check I got $100,000, I got 50. Another person says I got $10,000. They all got some money, but it was different levels. And they noticed that the king was rewarding the people in accordance with the value of the particular plant that they planted. And they came to the king and they said, Your Majesty, we'd like to ask you a question. And what is the question? It says, at the beginning of this project, you asked us, each one of us, to choose a particular thing to plant, and we did so. And now at the end, you obviously had a very clear-cut reward that you wanted to give to everybody for what they for based upon what they chose to plant. Why couldn't the king tell us ahead of time what it is that he was planning to pay, so that we would have known to choose for ourselves, to do this one, to plant that, not to plant the other? Because at the end of the day, this is obviously what the king wants. If the king paid more money for the cherry blossoms than he paid for the for the apple tree, that's because the king wants the cherry blossoms. Why don't you just tell us that? Let us know ahead of time. And the king told them, I don't want just the cherry blossoms, and I don't want just the almond trees, and I want just apple. I want a beautiful orchard, and I want it to contain everything. And I want the vegetable patch to be beautiful and healthy and lush and full of good vegetation. And so also with the flower garden, with the garden of flowers. And had I told you what the reward is, you would have all planted the same thing. But I don't want you all planting the same thing. I want my world to be a rich place. I want my kingdom to be a beautiful place. And that's why I didn't tell you what the reward is. I'm happy that you all made this world beautiful and you're all enjoying this beautiful world. That's the reward right there. The fact that you live in a beautiful society, in a beautiful world, that's your reward. And I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point because Hashem wants this world to be a beautiful world. And it's true that there are some mitzvot perhaps for which the reward may be less than other mitzvot. We'll find out in Olam Haba. But Hashem wants us to live in a beautiful world. And part of the beauty of the world is that it's full and rich with variety of different beautiful things. So there are people who are involved in Gemilut Hasadim. There are people who are involved in Tzedakah. There are other people who are involved in Talmud Torah. Not that anybody is patur from Talmud Torah, but the point being, because of the rich variety of the mitzvot, and because Hashem didn't tell us, I want you to do this mitzvah. If you do this, you can get a lot. Everybody's going to be doing that mitzvah. Nobody will be doing this lighter mitzvah. So now the world becomes beautiful, and we can all enjoy and benefit from that beauty. So that's the point of Haveh Zahir b'mitzvah kalla k'mitzvah hamura. That's the second lesson. You don't know what the reward is for the mitzvot. And finally, Ve'aveh mechashev, this is lesson number 3. Ve'aveh mechashev hefsed mitzvah keneged sechara. U'schar avera keneged hefseda. Okay, this is lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and as you can tell, this Mishnah is taking up a significant amount of this class because it really is a wonderful Mishnah. Right. There are actually some mitzvot where you can assess how important the mitzvah is. Because in some mitzvot, the Torah tells us what the punishment is for not having fulfilled the mitzvah. For example, if a person doesn't do berit milah, he's hayav karet. Karet is a very severe punishment. So from this, I can learn something important. I not only learn that if a person doesn't do berit milah, he's hayav karet, that's very severe, but from the severity of the punishment, I can learn that if a person does berit milah, the reward is simply astounding, right? So there are some cases where we can make a hishbon as to the reward you get for a mitzvah. For example, berit milah, as I illustrated. Another example is korban pesach. Also korban pesach. If you don't bring korban pesach, you're hayav karet. So from the fact that you would get karet but not bringing korban pesach, we therefore understand that if you bring korban pesach, there is a tremendous sachar for that. So you do have that. You also have that, right? But that's very rare. That's usually not the case. So there's another meaning to the Mishnah. I gave you the meaning that Harambam gives in the Pirush Mishnah, but there is a more conventional meaning, and that is, if you're about to do a mitzvah, I'll give you an example. It's a really good example. Let's say you want to do the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. So to write a Sefer Torah, most people do not know how to write a Sefer Torah. So you would get a sofer to write the Sefer Torah for you. And it does cost a lot of money. If you want to have a Sefer Torah written, it costs a lot of money. I mean, I know just I have a friend and I have a sofer who's, in my opinion, one of the best in the world. I mean, a person that I would use, Harav Askov from Eretz Yisrael. He was born in Halab, but he's a Uman, Bemet Maaseh Uman. For example, I know that when he buys, just to buy the kelah for the Sefer Torah, it costs like $10,000, right? Now, you can, and to write the Sefer Torah, if you want to write the Sefer Torah and have a good Sefer Torah, you would pay $45,000, $50,000. It's a lot of money. So a person is going to say, let me save money on that. And there are Sofrim who will do it for a lower price, right? But let me explain to you what would happen in that case. So in that case, they would use a kelaf, which is mashuach, which they put some sort of, they laminate it. And because it's mashuach, it's easier to write the letters and faster. And it's much faster to write the Sefer Torah. And then they give you a Sefer Torah mashuach. You save some money on it. The problem is that because it's mashuach, in about a year or two, it's going to become pasul. The letters will crack. But they do this, and it's sad that they do this. So the truth of the matter is, to write a Sefer Torah costs a lot of money, right? And it says, always think about the fact that if you have to make a tremendous effort to do a mitzvah, such as in the case of writing a Sefer Torah, that's just one example, there is a tremendous sachar that the person gets. Meaning, there is no such thing as a person making an effort to make a mitzvah and Hashem doesn't reward him. The reward that a person gets for this mitzvah will be tremendous. So here's another thing that we know about the reward of the mitzvah. It's true that you can have a mitzvah like Shiluach HaKen, which in 1 second, leman ya'arifun yamecha u'leman yitablach. But Hashem does look at the fact that you made an effort. And there is no such thing as a situation where, for example, a person paid $40,000, $50,000 for a Sefer Torah, whatever it costs, and where the person doesn't get an incredible reward. The rate of return and the reward a person gets for the performance of the mitzvah outweighs substantially and exponentially the amount of effort that a person put into the mitzvah. So that's another point of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, which is important to know. And he continues, Uschar avera keneged hefseda. I will give you the Uschar avera keneged hefseda. I will give you the interpretation of Harambam in the Pirush HaMishnayot. He says, Uschar avera keneged hefseda. Let's say there's an avon. A person can do an avon. And he abstains from doing an avon. He doesn't do the avon. He wanted to do an avon, but he abstains. The reward you get is commensurate with the punishment for that avon. I'll give you an example. If a person eats, once he eat pig meat, that would be malkut. He would get malkut for that. He abstains from eating pig meat. He refuses to eat it. So the reward he gets will be quite significant. You get rewarded for not doing an avon. That's the point. People don't realize it. It's not just that you get punished if you do the avon, but rather there is a reward for not doing the avon. But then the reward is commensurate with the punishment. So we brought the example of pig meat. Let's say a person has a halev kelayot, certain part of the fat of the kidneys of an animal, hayav karet. He doesn't have that. But because he doesn't have that, then we know that the reward will be even greater for not having that. Eshet ish, chas v'shalom, a person wants to act in a promiscuous fashion. There, the punishment is very severe. So the reward for abstaining from not doing that avon is very great. So there's a balance between the punishment that one would get for a mitzvah lo ta'aseh and the reward that one would get from abstaining from performing a mitzvah or violating a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. That's the explanation of Harambam. The more common explanation, in line with what I said before, is that always a person should consider the consequences of his action. Sometimes a person wants to do an avon, and what is the pleasure that person gets for the avon? I don't know. What is it? You eat a cheeseburger? How much pleasure can you get from a cheeseburger? How long does it last? I never ate one, but I assume it's 5 minutes, whatever. Let's say 5 minutes. So a person has 5 minutes of this incredible pleasure. He's eating a cheeseburger. Okay, what's the consequences of that? What misery is he bringing upon his life for that 5 minutes of pleasure? I mean, the misery that a person can do for 5 minutes of an avon can be a decade of misery. So when you think about doing an avon, you say, okay, I'm going to have this incredible cheeseburger from McDonald's, right? I always wanted to have a cheeseburger from McDonald's, and I'm going to finally do it. Well, wait, hold on. Are those 5 minutes of pleasure worth the misery? That's because there will be misery from that. There will be consequences, right? So before you decide to eat the cheeseburger, just think about what you're really doing. It ain't going to be a good choice. When you look back at it, you can say, what the heck did I do? I just suffered for it for 10 years of my life for that cheeseburger. It just wasn't worth it. It never is, right? Doing an avon is never worth it. So, all right, that's that lesson. And finally, we are coming to the fourth and final lesson of Rabbeinu Hakadosh, and it is as follows. He says, "Vehistakel bishlosha devarim ve'en ata ba lide avera." So you just heard the previous thing that he said. It ain't worth it. Don't do the avon, because the misery that you bring upon yourself for doing the avon far, far outweighs the temporary pleasure that you may have from the avon. And he says, if you want help, person wants help to abstain from an avon, I'll give you the following advice. How do you do it? How do you abstain? And he says, "Histakel b'shlosha devarim." Always have in mind the following three things. Have in mind the following three things. And if you have in mind the following three things, you will never do an avon. You won't be able to do an avon. And here they are. Da male mala mimach. And to summarize these three things, just be aware that there's something above you. Just remember there's something above you. And what is it that's above you? Number one, ayin ro'ah. An eye that sees. I'll explain that. Number two, ve'ozen shoma. There is an ear that hears. And finally, number three, bechol ma'asecha besefer nichtavin. There is a book, and in this book is writing, and the writing sets forth all of your actions. So all of your actions are described in a book, which say you did this, you did that, you did the other. Those are the three things. Okay, I want to look at this a little more closely. It says, I'm going to read it again. Histakel b'shlosha devarim ve'en ata ba lidei avera. Look at the language of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He says, consider the following three things, and you won't come. It doesn't say ve'en ata over avera, you won't make a sin. But rather he says, ve'en ata ba lidei avera, you don't come into the hands of the sin. You notice there's a subtle there's a subtle deviation from what I would have expected. I would have expected ve'enata over avera. You don't make a sin. It doesn't say that. It says enata valide layadayim shel, to the hands of a sin. So I want to explain that. And this I learned also from the grandson of Harambam, Rabbi David Hanagid. And he says like this, and I'm adding to it as I added to the previous thing he said. One of the things I learned from my father is that a great teacher makes you think. So you can't just read something and not add to it. So whenever Baruch Hashem, I'm thankful to God that I have that zechut, that I can first of all read these beautiful perushim, but add my own insights. So let's talk about this now. You don't come into the hands of a sin. What does that mean? Because when a person performs the sin now has its clutches on the person, right? You don't just perform a sin and get done with it, right? So you make an avon, whatever the avon is, and you, that's it. After that, you take a shower, you go to the mikveh, and you're done with it, right? No, the sin has hands, and those hands grab a person. We don't want to be bidei avera. We don't want to be in the clutches of the sin, right? I want to read to you a pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, "Ki histarta fanecha mimenu v'temurenu beyad avonenu." Hashem has hidden. This is the Jewish people speaking after they made an avon. Hashem has hidden His face from us, and when He hid His face from us, He allowed us to melt in the hands of our sin. Meaning, there's a concept of hell. We don't have the Christian concept of hell, obviously. But we do have a concept that when a person performs a sin, that sin creates a certain burning. And it controls the person now. And he's in its clutches, and it can make the person literally melt from the suffering that it brings to the person, right? So usually Hashem is there looking at us and protecting us. But the minute we decide to turn away from Hashem and we decide to perform an avon, we're now in the clutches of the avon. And the consequence is that we can literally melt from the pain and misery. And Hashem's not going to help us now because we chose to leave Him and we chose to do the avon. So it's a very powerful pasuk. But you see the idea of the hand, beyad avonenu. And there's another pasuk that I want to tell you about, also a beautiful pasuk. Kifo al adam yeshalem lo uchorach ish yamsienu. This is a pasuk in Iyyar. When a person gets rewarded for his good deeds, he's just bringing to himself what he actually did. If you made the world a better place, then obviously that's going to inure to your benefit, right? So, but when a person deviates and goes on the wrong road, and he goes on a road towards a dangerous place, that is, he made an avon, he's going to end up in a dangerous place. But it's not like the dangerous place was created by some mystical force. He created it. He chose to go there, right? So our actions have consequences, right? And that's why enadaba lideh avera. You see the idea of lideh avera? It's such an important diuk that I learned from Rabbi David, the grandson of Harambam. Okay, that's the first point I wanted to bring to your attention.
Rabbi, in the very beginning, you mentioned halacha aleph. Just curious, we use that verbiage for Pirqe Abot.
Yes.
We say halacha, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we say, I know the custom is to say Mishnayot, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Bet, but the more authentic is to say halacha. But either way is fine.
Right.
My father taught me to say halacha Aleph, halacha Bet.
Beautiful.
Okay, we still are in halacha Aleph. And so think about, if you don't want to get into the clutches of a sin, so think about what's above you. Here's what you do. The first thing is ayin ra'ah. The first thing is the God sees everything. Now you say, well, God is not physical, right? There's nothing physical about God. He has no physical existence. He exists, but not like we exist. So does God really see me? I mean, He doesn't have eyes. I have eyes, so I can see, but God doesn't have eyes. But it's deeper than that. The Greek philosophers were of the opinion that God may have created the world, but He doesn't relate to the world. He's not aware of what's taking place in the world that He created. And by us, we say no. We say, Einei Adonai, Hemma Meshotetim Bechol Haaretz. The eyes of God are traveling throughout the world, meaning Hashem is constantly aware. He sees everything that's happening. He sees the injustice that's happening in the world today. It's not a secret. Right? Sometimes we get a little depressed. We see the world around us and we see how things are, there is such a lack of equity and fairness in the world, right? Basic ideas of fairness are disappearing before our eyes. Hashem sees this, he will relate to this, and there will be consequences to all of that, right? So the first thing is Ain Ro'ah, right? The second thing is Ozen Shomat. Ozen Shomat means we're not only judged for what we do is visual, right? You can see what a person does, right? But we're also judged for what we speak. Because one of the holiest things in the world is human speech. Human speech was created so that human beings can attain wisdom. And it is through this speech that we can attain the highest forms of wisdom, right? But when people use speech in a cheap, degrading fashion and speak falsehoods, as most politicians, for example, do, right? Then a person will be judged for that. And a person says, well, hold on, does God really hear what I say? Can he really hear me? And we say this in the Tehillim, Hanota Ozen, Halo Yishma. He who planted ears in the human being, do you really think he doesn't hear? I mean, he invented the idea of sound and hearing. So yes, he does hear. So that's Ozen Shamat. So be careful what you do, because everything you do is observed. Be careful what you say, because everything you say is heard. So if you say something not nice to somebody and Hashem hears it, it's there. He knows what just happened, right? The Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia discusses ona'at devarim. The person uses hurtful speech, and it says, be very careful. It says, Ve'areta me'elohecha ani Adonai, about ona'at devarim, about using hurtful speech. It says, be very careful. God hears every word, and he knows if you hurt the person's feelings. You may not even know that you hurt his feelings, but he knows. So be careful what words you speak. There's an ear listening. And finally, this is a beautiful idea. And the idea is that everybody listening to this class, whether you like it or not, each one of you is going to write a book. Some of you may write more than one book. Some of you may have already published books or articles. I don't know. But each one of you will write a minimum of one book. And that book will be the story of your life. And you decide what's written in the book. You have complete autonomy. You can decide to write a book where somebody opens the book and it brings you tremendous shame and embarrassment. How could I have done that? How could I have said that? How could I have, this is the story of my life. But that's it. We're writing a book, the story of our lives, right? And
double spaced? Can we do double spaced?
Well, yeah. The point is not the quantity of the words, but the content of the story, right? So if you think about that deeply, and you think about the fact that at some point in time, however long our lives are, whatever the length of the life, it doesn't matter, but there comes a point in time where that book will be closed, meaning that book will be complete. By closed, I meant complete. And then that book will be available. So what do you want that book to say? So even if you led a sinful life, and even if you led a life which is, in a sense, not worthy and which doesn't bring you honor, but now's the time to think about, well, maybe I can write the other chapters in a different way. And, there'll be one of those books which starts out in one way, and then suddenly the person becomes, a transformed personality. There's also that, right? But the chol ma'asecha v'sefer nichtavim. So those are the things that a person should consider before engaging in sinful behavior or in inappropriate behavior or in hurtful speech. That's the wisdom. This is all from the wisdom of Rabbeinu Kadosh. Are there any questions? We have about 8 minutes left. And in the 8 minutes that we have left, I'm not going to be able to finish the next Mishnah. I will start the next Mishnah. I will probably finish it in my knis on Shabbat. But before, and if there's any questions, I will take them now.
The word histakel, best way to translate that again?
Observe, or be aware of. Histakel, I mean, in this context means be aware of. Put it in front of you at all times. Put it in front of you at all times, namely these three things.
In the mind.
Yeah,
Histakel.
of course, in your mind, yes.
Because you can't see these things, of course. Right. Okay.
Yeah, correct,
Right.
correct. Okay, so the next Mishnah, the author of the next Mishnah is, and it's a great Mishnah. It's really a shame that I'm not going to be doing it on, maybe, I feel like maybe I should repeat it next week. But it's a great Mishnah. It's one of the most important Mishnayot, I think. And I will maybe speak about it a little now. I'll start it. Rabban Gamliel beno shel Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi Omer. You have the Hillel, and then you have the grandson of the famous Hillel. His name was Rabban Gamliel HaZaken. His grandson was Rabban Gamliel de Yavne. The grandson of Rabban Gamliel de Yavne was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and then the son of Rabbeinu HaKadosh was the third Rabban Gamliel. So this is Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He says, Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eres, sheyeriat shenehem meshakachat avon. He says that the best Torah, the best course of study that a person can embark upon is a course of study, meaning Torah study, that includes work. Meaning if you're involved in Talmud Torah, meaning intensive study of Torah, and you're also involved in working and in making a living, in having a profession, right? The combination of those two things is the best thing, right? And the reason it's the best thing is when you're involved in Talmud Torah on the one side and intensive work on the other side, you can never make an avon. I mean, you're just like, you're so exhausted from those two major projects in your life. How can you possibly make an avon? So this is the best thing. It's and he says more than that. I'm kind of going through the Mishnah quickly. I have a lot more to say about it, but I do want to try to take the 5 minutes and and on the other hand, you say, well, okay, I don't really care about that. I want to study Torah all day. I'm from Bnei Brak, and I want to be in a kollel all day, doing nothing but studying Torah. And again, let's assume that this is a person who's actually studying Torah all day, because most people do not have the intellectual skills to actually focus all day on a text and study all day. That's a simple truth. I've been in yeshivot and I've seen what happens. Some people do, but most don't. But anyway, it says, "V'chol Torah she'en ima melacha, sofa betela." If a person decides to only study Torah and not do any work, the Torah will end up becoming annulled. V'choreret avon, and it would actually lead to sin. Okay. I want to say that it's not my purpose here to criticize the movement of, and there are many Jews who would disagree with this. I don't need to criticize them. It's not my place to criticize them. Who am I to criticize them? I don't criticize them. I'm just reading the Mishnah and explaining the Mishnah. And I think the Mishnah speaks for itself. I think it's clear from the Mishnah what the position of Rabban Shimon, the son of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, was. And his position was very clear, and it is that only studying Torah and neglecting livelihood, neglecting a profession, is not something that's beneficial for Talmud Torah. It's actually detrimental to Talmud Torah. Because when you don't have a profession, when you don't have that fire within you that tells you, get it right, or you're going to suffer. You're not going to make money. You're not going to be able to pay your bills. You're not going to be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. That you get from a profession. You need to work hard and do things in the right way and take responsibility. That mindset serves a person who studies Torah. Because when you study Torah, you're supposed to have that mindset. It's supposed to be done in a professional, precise, accurate manner. You better think about what you're studying. You better be careful not to make mistakes. You better be careful how you behave. Take it seriously. So you see how the combination of studying Torah together with the profession is the best combination, because the Torah is going to help you act in the proper way as a professional. It will give you the boundaries, what you can and can't do, what's allowed, what's not allowed. It'll make you a greater professional because you will come with integrity. But on the other hand, the profession will make you a better student of Torah. I say this all the time. I think I just said it last week, actually. I remember going into the kollel. I used to study in a kollel. I knew that I wouldn't be there forever, and they didn't pay me for studying. I was studying because I just wanted to study. But I remember the attitude was kind of like, you have all day to study, and all week, and all month, and all year, and your whole life. So, you kind of come in, you peel the banana, you read the gossip column in the latest Yated Ne'aman. Which rabbi are they maligning this week? And and so on. And, this goes on for like about half an hour. And then maybe you study for 5 minutes, but at this point you need to go to the bathroom. So you go to the bathroom, you're in the bathroom, you have to make Netilat Yadayim. There's another person making Netilah, and you're kind of chatting, and then you come back, and, it's lunchtime at some point, and, and it's kind of like fluff and stuff. And, and I think you get the, idea, right? No professional, and or let me put it in other words, any professional who acts like that in his job, they wouldn't tolerate it. It wouldn't be allowed. So when you have that system that tells you gotta achieve, right? You gotta do it right. You're not going to come into the kollel and start eating a banana and, leisurely opening the newspaper, and then, 5 minutes later, bathroom, netilah, cup of tea, cup of coffee, smoke a cigarette, every 2 seconds, another break. You wouldn't do that, right? I see there's a comment here. Right. I mean, I do agree that, of course, the Torah is telling us how to live, and that's why I think the Torah affects your profession in a positive way. So it's a dual street. And again, and I see it's 9:30 now, but again, please don't quote me on this. Don't say, oh, Hacham Fa'ul said, or Rabbi Fa'ul said, oh, he's against the kollels. I'm not. I'm just describing to you what the Mishnah says. People can choose to be against the Mishnah. It's not my place to tell people whether they should or shouldn't follow the Mishnayot or follow the Chachamim. I can only read to you what the Mishnah says and describe it to you in an honest fashion, right? I can't tell people what to do, and why people choose not to do this. That's a question I guess they can ask themselves, or maybe someday someone will ask them that question. But I don't want you to say that I'm against the kollels. I'm not. I'm in favor of the Mishnah, and there's a big difference there. So in any event, I hope that next week we have the opportunity to continue studying this, because it is fascinating when you read the real Jewish wisdom of the Chachamim and you compare it to what's happening today. Oftentimes, it is a bit surprising. So let's continue this. This study.
That was Rabban Gamliel, you said, on the Mishnah?
Rabban Gamliel the third, the son of Rabbeinu HaKadosh.
Gosh, okay.
Laila Tov, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Chacham.
Thank you, Hacham.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.